Welcome to season 14 of the Parenting Aces podcast, a proud member of the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. I'm your host, Lisa Stone, and this week I am talking with Ridley Plummer of Tennis Australia about an incredible new digital platform called Beyond Tennis. And I'm not going to give any spoilers, but if you want to actually see the platform, please watch the video version of this. Otherwise, you can listen to us on your favorite podcast app. And Ridley shares some really interesting information about what went into building the platform, what the national governing body of Australia's involvement has been, and what their mission is in terms of growing the game of tennis. I think governing bodies all around the world can take a note from Tennis Australia. They are really on the cutting edge of embracing technology, funding the technology, and bringing tennis to people that may never have been exposed to it before. So I think this is a super cool episode and hope you guys will enjoy it and share it. Just a reminder, if you're not already, make sure you're following us on all of our social media channels. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on TikTok, we're on X, we're on Blue Sky, we're on LinkedIn, we have our YouTube channel. So look for @ParentingAces on all of those platforms and don't miss a thing. All right, sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Ridley Plummer of Tennis Australia. Ridley, welcome to the podcast all the way from Australia. We're thrilled to have you here and so excited to chat about this new initiative from Tennis Australia.
Hi, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
So, Beyond Tennis, it's a game. It is a video game, but in app form, right? Or can it also be played on desktop?
So it's just an app at this stage, and I think game in the short form is probably correct, but we've built a bit of an infrastructure that is a bit of an ecosystem of social media, gaming, and sport as well. We wanted to create something that was completely unique, that stood a little bit outside the box of what you would typically refer to as a game, I guess.
Well, so what's interesting, and you and I were discussing this offline, is Tennis Australia has this big initiative of investing in technology and has really been working hard with several companies to expand the world of tennis into video games, for example, and social media, and all sorts of realms. Can you talk a little bit about what your role is and how it relates to Tennis Australia and kind of how that relationship came to be?
It's a great question. When I first started at Tennis Australia, I was very much of the impression that we were a rights holder and we ran events and tennis, and then very quickly learnt that one of the key mantras at Tennis Australia is to innovate and continually grow the game of tennis, like you mentioned, through the use of technology, new platforms, acquiring new audiences, and then ultimately trying to bring those new audiences to tennis. And all with this overarching strategy that we believe that playing makes life fun. And whether that is playing on a court or on a computer or on an app or with your friends or with your family, we need to talk to a wider range of audience and bring them to tennis in some way, shape, or form. So whether that is picking up a racket and playing or picking up a controller and playing, we sort of put those in the same bucket to some extent. And my role in all of that is to use new technology to acquire those audiences. So I'm looking at anything that's new in the space. So in the case of Beyond Tennis, it's a cross section of sport, social, and gaming, as I mentioned, all with this lens of the use of artificial intelligence. But when we look further outside the box, we're always looking at things like Roblox or Minecraft education, Fortnite, various types of esports, etc. So there's a whole gamut of activations and activities out there that we can lean on to grow the audience around tennis and ultimately try and bring them to our events or get them to pick up a racket.
I love that. So your title, your job title in its official way is Senior Manager of Digital Sales and Metaverse.
That's correct.
Huh?
Mouthful, isn't it?
Yeah. Can you tell us what digital sales I get? What does Senior Manager of Metaverse mean?
So I think, and like you said, we were discussing a little bit of this offline as well. And I think the metaverse, I think everyone looks at it a little bit differently. I look at it as though any environment online where you can game or explore or learn about something. So I think when we look at augmented reality, virtual reality, gaming, metaverse, or the different aspects of what that makes up, I think is really unlimited and allows someone on a digital journey to go into an environment that doesn't have to be a 3D environment. It could be a 2D, it could be a learning environment, whatever that happens to be. Um, and an opportunity for us to place tennis or place the Australian Open in that environment for people to explore and learn about. So we know that, like you said, we're a million miles away in Melbourne. We're a long way from the rest of the world to come to our event. So if we can take the Australian Open and tennis to them, wherever they are in the world, and put that through a virtual environment that they might be exploring, we've got an opportunity to talk to them one-on-one or familiarize them with our brand from an earlier age.
So this innovation that's happening in Tennis Australia, are you seeing this with other national federations, or do you feel like Tennis Australia is really kind of breaking the barrier here and forging new opportunities for everybody around the world?
That's a great question. And I think there's sort of almost two parts to the question. There's tennis federations and then there's other sporting federations. When we look at tennis federations, yes, there are other federations that are playing around in this space as well. Maybe not quite to the extent that we are, but in saying that, we always want to lead the pack in what's being done in tennis. We're seen as the most innovative, one of the most innovative sporting organizations in the world, but certainly one of the most innovative tennis organizations in the world. And so we always want to be pushing the boundaries on what we're doing from a Tennis Australia perspective and how we're using that technology to grow the sport. I think that's important. We're not just doing it for the sake of doing it. There's always a strategy or an objective that it must tie back to. And then when we look at other sports organizations or federations or rights holders, yeah, absolutely. There's a lot that are playing in this space. There's certainly some that are a long way behind others, but there are a lot that we can learn from as well, that whether it be in football or basketball or various American-based sports or throughout Asia or global sports as well. There's a lot of money being invested into new technology at the moment. I think people within these organizations realize the importance of leveraging new technology to attract new audience. The competition for new audience right now is so fierce that you've got so much choice as a consumer that if we can attract someone to tennis from that younger age through, I guess, having fun, I think we're one step ahead of a lot of those other organizations.
So I want to ask you a couple things. First, I want you to tell us what your background is that brought you to this position within Tennis Australia. And then I want to get you to dig into beyond tennis and talk to us about what the game actually is.
Perfect. So prior to coming to Tennis Australia, I was working for a product design agency and we were creating products that used new technology. So this is sort of 10, 15 years ago. So that was when things like experimental Wi-Fi, radio frequency, Bluetooth, more in-home Wi-Fis and chips were becoming smaller and smarter. And you were thinking like, where does the iPhone or Android technology go from here? So if you put yourself sort of 10, 15 years ago, things have changed a lot since then. So I was working on a number of accounts that were linked to a number of large North American sports leagues. And I was traveling back and forth to the US activating sporting events. with new technology and engaging consumers in that space. And then the opportunity at Tennis Australia came up, and I was fortunate enough to get the role as what was at the time Business Solutions lead. And Business Solutions is essentially the innovation arm of business development within Tennis Australia. A little bit of an internal agency, if you like. So when our business development team was going out to market, they would come to my team and say, how do we do this? What ideas do you have? Bring us some big, bold, fancy ideas, and we'll take them to our potential partners. And
So
then
you
as
were
we built up
the creative piece.
100%.
Okay.
Yeah, it was essentially an internal creative agency that we built. And then off the back of that, I was sort of always following what was happening in sort of the crypto space and NFTs and blockchain technology, more as a bit of a side hobby than anything, just to kind of stay up with technology. And as that kind of grew in the sort of, I reckon, maybe 2019, 2020, 2021, the business came to me and said, I think we need to be playing in this space. We're seeing what's going on in the global market. We know you're dabbling around a little bit out of hours in that space. Are you interested in taking a lead here internally? And I think it was just a great opportunity and a bit of a door opening moment for me to go, well, this could be the next big thing. Yeah, I'll take on that role. And the executive team pretty much said, well, you're moving desk tomorrow, relinquish all the roles and projects that you've got right now. You start now, we've got a big idea. And basically that big idea kind of led into about 4 or 5 new ideas that have come to life over the last 2 or 3 years, from NFTs and Metaverse and Roblox and Minecraft education, and now beyond tennis. So I've just finished my 8th AO and 7 years at Tennis Australia, and now we're looking at how we grow tennis players and a platform within the environment of artificial intelligence.
Very cool. Very cool. So let's jump into Beyond Tennis. And as I had told you before, I've downloaded the app, I've taken a look, I've played around a little bit. And what strikes me first about this app is, unlike other sports related video games, I, as the user, am not a player.
Correct.
I have a different role. So that was like, whoa, wait a minute. What do you mean I'm not a player? What am I doing then? So I want you to talk us through all that.
So when we first started ideating Beyond Tennis, we were looking at how we integrate the technology, first and foremost, into an engaging format for the consumer. And as we were building out ideas, we were like, what are those products that don't ensure the user has to invest too much time, but they need to be strategic about the time that they do invest? So we looked at the cross section between fantasy football and Tamagotchi, and the complexity of fantasy football and how deep you can go into the data if you want, and then the simplicity of Tamagotchi. So Tamagotchi, for those who might be a bit younger than Lisa and I, was essentially a small digital toy that you kept alive on a daily basis by pressing sort of 1, 2, or 3 buttons, and all you really had to do was feed it and train it and discipline it. I think that was about it, and maybe clean up after it. But then on the flip side, we looked at fantasy football and the complexity of the data and having to build a real strategy around how you ran your team and having to understand information about individual players and the decisions that they made and how they went about the sport. So then we looked at building a cross section of those two and sort of meeting in the middle somewhere, where if you want to get into the data of the player that you're coaching, you can, it's all there. But if you want to just converse with them and coach them, you can do that too. So Beyond Tennis is essentially a strategy coaching game where you, as the user, choose a player. Now, that player has been completely created using artificial intelligence. They're not real. They look and feel real, and their social media looks and feels real, and their data looks real. Their biography is unbelievable. The details that we put into the background of these players may as well be a real person. And then we have storytelling engines that build narratives around these players. So you as a coach get to learn about the player, their likes, their dislikes, what they're good at, poor at, their strengths, weaknesses, and how they go about their tennis. And then the tennis is the third element. So we've essentially built an engine that can replicate non-biased tennis matches in a virtual environment where the players will play off against one another based on a combination of around 120 characteristics. So that could be forehand, backhand, drop shots, volleys, lobs. But then on the flip side, it's mental health, it's fitness, it's various strengths and weaknesses as well. So the engine will completely play one player off against another in the same format that we play tennis on the court. So 15 love, 15 all, 30, 15, etc., etc. And the matches simulate in real time. So what
But you,
the
as
what,
the user, are not controlling the player during that play. This is all
correct.
being done behind the scenes.
Correct. In the same way that a normal coach can't really control their player when they're on the court. So we
Wait,
wanted
what?
to, yeah, believe it or not. Yeah, so we wanted to create something that was a little bit different to your typical gaming. So much of what we've built is around storytelling, which I guess for the younger generation is really important that they can influence the story. They can also influence the success or failure on the court, but they don't really have too much control over that. So they can impact the skills that the player train in their sort of everyday environment. But the thing that we see really important is the ongoing storytelling of the social media aspect and the conversation that you have with your player. So as you've probably been playing along a little bit, and I'm not sure who you're coaching, Lisa, but one of my players is Victoria Chambers. She's the British girl. So she's kind of built on a personality of being the all English private club girl, comes from a wealthy family, great tennis player, but not necessarily the best tennis player. And the way that she communicates, I'm now starting to learn more about her and the way that the engine is communicating with me via her. And then the replies that I share with her or the strategy that I share with her, she's now starting to react differently to what I share or my responses. So if my response is a little bit too easy on her, she might be offended that I'm going too easy and she gets disappointed and she's like, no, we need to train harder, push me harder, sort of thing. Whereas if I go too hard, she's like, I'm exhausted, I need a rest, this isn't good for my health, etc. So there's so many different, I guess, branches of the tree that the narrative can go down as well that really plays back to the strategy aspect that we wanted to put the consumer in the position of. You're the coach, you're the agent, you're the strategist. The decisions that you make today are going to impact your player tomorrow.
So the player grows and changes based on their interaction with the user slash coach.
Correct. So all of the coaches that are coaching Victoria, all of the information that they're feeding back to her is going back into her engine. And then that information is being kind of dissected by the engine, and she's changing based on the habits that everyone's either training her on or encouraging her on. So let's say she's weak on her backhand at the moment, but everyone's using their points in the system to train her backhand. That will gradually get better. And that the match play engine will then learn that as well. And so when it's simulating match play, she's going to become stronger on her backhand. And then everything that's happening off the court as well, the decisions that are being made by the coaches, that could be down to the food that she eats, where she travels, what she does. This is a little bit of the Tamagotchi model as well, the simplicity of it. If she's like, I want to head out for dinner, should I go and get a burger or sushi? We would then take the information from all the coaches and their decision making, and whichever had the highest weighting, the engine then drives that story. So if everyone's suggesting she goes and gets sushi, then tomorrow on her Instagram, you might see her down at the local sushi shop or sharing some imagery of her dinner that she went and had at Nobu or wherever. So the storytelling aspect of you making a decision today and seeing that play out tomorrow, we feel is really important.
And when you say posting on her Instagram, like really posting on Instagram or Instagram through Beyond Tennis?
So that's her own Instagram. So
Like
we have five.
for reals, like I could follow her.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh
There's
my God,
five
this is so
players.
crazy. Yeah.
So there's five players in the platform right now that can be coached. There's 16 players in total right now that represent 8 teams. So those 8 teams, we also want people to engage with too. So when you select your first player, you automatically get support, or you automatically give support for the team that they represent. So Victoria, for example, plays for the United Tennis Collective. So I also have a direct line of conversation with the United Tennis Collective channel within the app. So they're also feeding me information about the team, because the way that the competition is structured within the app is there's a male competition, a female competition, and then a mixed doubles competition. So similar to the United Cup that we have
Mhm.
in Australia here in the lead up to AO. We wanted it to be a little bit more of a teams competition as well. So yes, the individual is playing, but they're also representing teams. So you'll also see within that team wheelhouse that we have the Infosys Aces. So the Infosys Aces were built off the back of Infosys, who are one of our great partners at Tennis Australia. And then we see all of those teams in the future being owned by a sponsor as well. Or we see all of these players having their own sponsors. So there's no reason that Parenting Aces, for example, couldn't be a sponsor of Victoria Chambers in the future. And we see that as an opportunity to create new IP for our business as well, because Tennis Australia owns these players and we own the league and the tournaments that are run within it and the platform. So how we actually utilize that for extension into the year is also really important, because for us as a tennis organization, yes, we play tennis all year round, but our major focus is that 3 weeks in January. So we've taken a much broader strategy with this platform for it to be a year-round, always-on platform, which is what a lot of my role encompasses, is how do we use platforms that are available to us 24/7, 365 to continue to grow and engage with that tennis audience.
Do you see this expanding? You're talking about the 3 weeks of the Australian Open, but there's also Billie Jean King Cup, there's Davis Cup, there's I don't know what other professional team events happening. They keep changing names, but do you see that Beyond Tennis is going to make its way into all of those types of events? And would it be simply as part of Tennis Australia? I mean, I think what's cool right now is you do have your virtual players are representing countries all over the world and not just the Grand Slam countries. I mean, a variety of countries. And yes, you're limited to just a handful right now, but that will presumably grow. Um, it, I mean, I think it's so interesting to think of this kind of making its way interesting and a little scary. I got to be honest with you, but like the whole AI thing, I'm still having trouble wrapping my head around. But I do find it super interesting as a way to use technology to, like you're saying, draw additional fans into this sport, but from a very different point of view than what we're typically seeing to try and bring new fans into the sport.
Absolutely. You're 100% correct. We're seeing a bit of a shift in the way that consumers engage with sport and with brands as well. And we've seen that happening for probably 10 to 15 years, which is
Yeah.
probably it's been the social media generation, right? Everyone engages with brands very differently. So we see it as an opportunity to bring people to tennis in a way that they may not have thought that tennis existed in the past. And I think there's a couple of things that you touched on. I think one's the use of AI and sort of almost in a gaming way to blur the lines of what's potentially real and what's not. And yes, absolutely, there's an element of us doing that, but we're not trying to trick anyone. I think that's very important to note is that we're not trying to fool anyone that this is something that it's not. We're very clear that it is a game and it's been created to engage people with tennis or engage them with tennis outside of the normal hours that they might normally play, watch, or attend tennis events. You then talked about the other tournaments throughout the year. So right now we ran the first tournament alongside the Australian Open, and it was called the Australian Open, and we used Australian Open branding. Um, the tournaments have now moved to Japan. So in Beyond Tennis, we're now running the Tokyo Open, which is happening in Japan. We then have the opportunity to essentially pack up the players and the game and move it to wherever we want. So they could go to Singapore next, or they could go to Dubai, or they could go to Rio de Janeiro, they could go to Los Angeles. We can move them wherever we want. We have that opportunity, but we're also happy to discuss with other organizations and other brands and tournaments about bringing Beyond Tennis to that location as well. And that has been interesting conversations that we've had with a number of brands. And to be honest, most of the time it's either cities or countries that we're having discussions with governments around the opportunity to potentially bring Beyond Tennis and the players to their city. Because of course, they have to fly there and then they have to stay at a hotel and then they move around the city and they visit tourist locations and they take photos and they share content of what they're doing in that environment. And we do that in a way that I guess doesn't cost us anything because we don't have to fly them on a commercial
Right.
airline. They fly there. But it's really interesting, again, that storytelling aspect that comes through it. And then, yeah, I think there's opportunity for us to continue to grow globally. You talked about where players come from. So right now we've got 16 players. Almost all of those players, I think, right now are from a different country. And we've strategically created those players from countries that are a mixture of tennis heartland and tennis growth markets. So we've got players from the US, Canada, England, Spain, Germany, like traditional tennis heartlands, Australia as well. But we're also looking at Philippines, Indonesia, China, Korea, Brazil, like big growth markets that we see audience coming from in the very near future. So we always, throughout the period of growth in and building of Beyond Tennis, we were looking at it with a lens of if we're going to create a player who could potentially be heroed by people in that region, where do we want to do that? And so another one within the Infosys Aces team is Anya Shah. She's from India, and she was created basically in close consultation with the team from Infosys. So even down to the way she looks, the way she speaks, her mannerisms, because when we look at where she's from in India, they were very specific about her needing to have specific mannerisms and talk with a specific accent, and look a certain way as well. So we had to train the engines that we have to design her to talk like she talks and talk consistently with that kind of language and narrative as well.
That's so cool. That is just so cool. Are you guys coming to Indian Wells?
Could be, could be. A Western US swing is definitely on the cards, and like
But
Indian
not for
Wells
2025?
could be. Hey, we're so flexible with what we can do with this platform because of how fast we can move. We can make decisions really quickly. So we essentially haven't planned too much of the rest of the schedule of the first series of tournaments because we want that flexibility to be able to decide really only days before the players travel to that location and play that tournament. We don't need to book courts. We don't need to build infrastructure around the tournament. Really, we just need to tell the engine the surface that they're playing on, the location in which they're playing, how a player may be affected by the heat or the cool or the humidity, and it builds into their strategy as well. And then we can pass all that information on to the user so they can learn things about their player that, you know what, Victoria may not do well in the heat. And if she's originally from England, she's going to Indian Wells, it's going to be sort of in the, let's do Fahrenheit, for most of your audience, probably in the 90s for most of the tournament. How is she going to recover from that? How is she going to prepare for those matches? And that's where the strategy aspect for, I think, not just gamers, but tennis players in reality comes into effect and needs to be thought through in the way that they play the game as well. And the decision making for a user actually has implications for the player. It may not be as harsh as the implications of not hydrating before going and playing a 3 hour match in Indian Wells, but it still has implications for their virtual player. So we want it to be an education piece for users at the same time.
Well, if it's any, influence or sway on you, this episode is going to air during the first week of Indian Wells. So just saying, be kind of fun.
Could be. All right, I'll make a few calls this afternoon and see what we can do about getting down to Southern California for a couple of weeks.
Super cool. Super cool. So one of the other user options with Beyond Tennis is to be a player's agent, correct?
Yeah,
Can you talk a little bit about that and the decision behind adding that kind of role?
yeah. Again, this comes back to the, I guess, strategic decision making that we want users to represent within the platform. So we talk about the coaching aspect and training skills and making strategic decisions on the court. We then look off the court as well. So of those factors that come into play, we want the user to have impact on the 24/7 lives of these players. So the way that they communicate about other players in the platform, who they like, who they dislike, what they're spending their potential earnings on, what they're spending their day doing. Are they working out? Are they on the court? Are they traveling? Are they talking with sponsors? Are they just bad mouthing other players? We want there to be that real aspect of life off the court as well. And as an agent, more so than a coach, if we look at coaching being more on the court and agent being more off the court, we want you as a user to have impact on all of those decision making opportunities that the player will come to you for. And the player comes to you and converses with you in a chat feature. So as you'd be familiar with, Lisa, you'll get essentially a text message or a message from the player that says, "Hey, I've got 6 hours free today. Should I go to this gallery and check out this activation, or should I go and get some food?" The decision that you make, combined with all the other agents or coaches, if you like, then impacts the decision that the player makes. So we then have multiple layers to that impact their different skills and bio, essentially. So if you decide that they should go to the gallery, that's probably great for their mental health. If they go for food, they're probably going to ask you what sort of food they should go for. And then if they're going for pizza and burgers, it's probably going to impact their fitness a little bit. But if they go for sushi, it might be good for their fitness on the flip side. So there's a lot of different layers to the platform that a user can engage with and have influence and impact on. And they then get to see that on the other side. And that could be both the positive and negative impacts of the decisions that they've made.
One of the things that I am finding so interesting about the technology coming out and how tennis is utilizing it is a lot of these new products hitting the marketplace. give the user a chance to experience the game as other than a player or a fan, to take on a different role. And so in the case of Beyond Tennis, you can take on the role of coach, you can take on the role of agent, gives you a taste of what it means to have that job. And so for junior players, for example, who are spending all of their time on the tennis court, that's what they do with their life. And maybe they have the goal to play in college, and then maybe they start thinking, okay, then what after college? Maybe I'm good enough to try the pro tour, but maybe I then need to go get another job. But I really love tennis and I want to stay involved in some way, shape, or form. After playing Beyond Tennis, maybe I'm going to consider becoming an agent, a player's agent, or maybe I'm going to get into the coaching realm because I didn't realize that it involved all these little nuances that I've learned to kind of master as a user in this platform. We recently talked to Brian Teacher, who's got a new coaching platform, and it has built in the ability to add commentary. And so for somebody that's interested in becoming a broadcaster, it gives them a platform to practice those skills and start to really develop them in a positive way. I think that's something new and different that is really just hitting our sport. I don't know if it's existed in other sports, for a period of time, but I'm just starting to see it in tennis. Is that part of the thought process as a federation that, hey, our job's not just to develop tennis players, our job's not just to grow our fan base, but there are all these pieces to this sport that need to be addressed, and we've got to bring people in and make them competent in these 100 different areas.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from a tennis perspective, most definitely. And the way that we talked about it when we were building the platform was that just about anyone can go and get a racket and walk onto a court and play tennis. But not everyone and very few people will actually get to be the coach. And I think the coach plays a really important part in a professional player's or even an amateur player's life on the court. That if we can put people in that position that may not otherwise have thought that, we can engage them with the sport in a completely different way. And I'll go sort of off tangent for a moment. We think about it similarly with the Australian Open as well. It's a tennis tournament, but it's also an entertainment event. So we want people to come to the tennis, but enjoy the entertainment that goes on around the tennis. And if we can engage them with the sport through a different avenue, then we've succeeded in bringing them to the sport. So similarly with this angle of you're not actually picking up a racket and playing, but you're engaging with tennis through a new angle that you may not have otherwise thought to. One of the ideas that we also had when we were first building was the ability for, I guess, celebrity style players. So, and when I say celebrity, I'm just more referring to normal players and their ability to converse with the everyday consumer. If you've got a Nick Kyrgios, for example, he can't converse with hundreds or thousands or even tens of thousands of consumers every day and show his personality to them. But the way that we've created the likes of Victoria Chambers or the other 4 or 5 players, Liam Jackson from Australia or Anyan Shah from India, because of the way they're built, they can converse with not just their one coach, but tens of thousands of coaches in a second, or hundreds of thousands of coaches in a second, and almost daily if we want them to. So we wanted to explore and experiment with the desire of everyday fans to communicate with players rather than putting it the other way, because that just simply can't happen. If if you've got hundreds of thousands of fans who might be a fan of Nick or Novak or Rafa, they can't communicate back to the fans in a one-on-one environment. But the way that we've created the platform, as you've probably seen, it feels very one-to-one. Like
Yeah.
you're receiving messages from the player, you're receiving photos from them, you're receiving voice messages, videos. So it feels very personal in the way that they're communicating back to you. So I think we wanted to put the consumer on the other side of the fence a little bit and put them in the shoes of that coaching agent, but also a fan. I think you can coach and engage with your player on a day-to-day basis, but you're also becoming a fan of them.
Yeah.
You're almost becoming a friend of them in a way at the same time. You're interested to see what that next message is. What is the next voice note that they're sending? Where are they traveling in the world next? And how do I get to influence that decision as well? So it's a really interesting intersection of I guess a little bit of human psychology in there as well to see how people act when they get put in that position and the
Yeah.
decisions that they do make when they maybe don't have quite as much impact as they would in reality.
Got it. Got it. I know you have another screen pulled up. I would love for you just to quickly show us what Beyond Tennis looks like. It's a little unnerving, I got to tell you, the first time you open it, because I mean, it looks real. I mean, these look like real people moving, talking, acting as you or I are moving, talking, and acting.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a really quick example of how the players appear within the app and a little bit of a snapshot of some of the data points that you have access to and how you can train the player. So this is Victoria's page, for example, and we talk about the data that provides this information. So we actually used an extensive data library that we have at Tennis Australia, and then paired that with the technologies to allow the managers and users to analyze the data and improve the player's performance. So on the top right-hand side here, you'll see sort of your typical XP or points allocation. And then I can allocate those points to different aspects of Victoria's game. So in here, you'll also see there's a scout report. So that scout report is generated by our engine based on the next match that she has coming up. So if I look at that scout report, it'll say that the next player is fast around the court. So we need to improve Victoria's speed. So I can therefore train her speed. I might need to train her backhand consistency because it's looking like it's awfully low here at the moment. And then there's other aspects, like she's obviously fit and her forehand's excellent. But beyond what you can see on this page here, there's also another 20 or 30 aspects that we can train, but we can't train them all at once. You can't go out on the court and train 30 things all in one session. We understand that if you go to the gym, you're probably training weights or you're training cardio, or if you're on the court, you're practicing your forehand or your volleys or your lobs or your serve. So we want that to be realistic. And then we have the match simulation here. So this is actually a match result from one of the matches, but the simulation happens in real time where you may have seen also you can click through the tournament section and then re-watch a match. Now, we don't have that match in typical match vision right now. It is something that we're working on, but right now it simulates what the match result would have been. As I mentioned earlier, 15 love, 15 15 all, 15 30, 30 all. And it simulates that very quickly. So you can watch a match in the space of about 90 seconds. And that will then drive you a result. And that's how you earn points as well, by engaging with the player, engaging with their matches, reading their bios, reading the news articles about them as well. So I would encourage everyone to download, have a look around, explore the app, the various features, but also Yeah, dive into the data and the stories and the news that has been built around these players because it's incredibly realistic. And I think that's what we wanted it to be when we built it. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we're not trying to pretend like these players aren't real, but we really want to blur the lines between what is and what isn't, and use the technology in a way that is not only beneficial to us but beneficial to tennis more holistically as well. And we really see this as a rising tide lifts all ships moment where if we can have hundreds of thousands of users coaching players in beyond tennis, particularly users that may not have otherwise engaged with tennis, then we've done our job in bringing more users and more people to the sport.
Love it. Love it. If somebody is interested in downloading Beyond Tennis, they just go to the app store. Is it iOS and Android or just iOS at
Absolutely.
this point? Both.
Yep. So
Okay.
iOS and the Google Play Store, and just search Beyond Tennis. And there's also a very basic website that can lead you to those links directly. That is just playbeyondtennis.com. And then you can download. And the first thing that you're going to be prompted with is selecting your player. You
Yeah.
don't really get the opportunity to explore before you have to make that selection. So strategically think about who you might want to coach. It might be where they're from. It might be the team they play for. It might be the way they look. It might be that they're male or female. Totally up to you in the decision that you make when you choose that player. And then as you go through the ranks of earning points and more status within the platform, you get the opportunity to open up more players. So right now I'm coaching Victoria Chambers and Liam Jackson and seeing the very different ways in which they act and react as well, which is really interesting because now I've got two players in my wheelhouse. I'm having to think in different ways about the way that I coach them or interact with them as well, which for a coach or an agent, more often than not, coaches have more than one athlete that they're working with. So you need to think about the way that you engage with them and also where you spend your points. I think that's really important as well, is
Mm.
that you've only got a limited amount of points to spend. So if Victoria is asking you to hire a court for her because she's in Dubai on a little weekend away, and that's going to cost you 1,000 points versus Liam, who is shopping in a thrift short store and wants you to buy this cool old vintage jumper for him for 500 points, where are you going to spend your XP? So
Yeah.
there's that strategy element coming into it as well.
So cool. So cool. Ridley, thank you so, so much for making time to come talk with us and share Beyond Tennis with the Parenting Aces audience. I, it's, my brain is hurting right now. I'm thinking about all the different pieces of this, and because I didn't grow up with this type of technology, it's something I'm still trying to learn about. But for the younger generation that is has lived with this their entire existence, I think this is going to be kind of a no-brainer, especially if you are a lover of tennis. But also, I'm just thinking in terms of our junior players, maybe playing this at school on a break and their non-tennis friends being like, hey, what's that? That's a great way to introduce, again, new people to the sport and bring them in a way that feels familiar to them. And I think that's really cool. I big kudos to Tennis Australia. I hope y'all keep up this investment in technology and innovation and continuing to really think outside the box in terms of what it means to grow the game of tennis. And I'm a big fan. So thanks for taking the time, and I really appreciate you sharing this with us.
Thanks, Lisa. Likewise, it's been great to chat.
To my audience, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Enjoy Indian Wells if you're getting out there in person, or if you're watching on TV, or anything in between, or maybe you're with Beyond Tennis and Beyond Tennis is at Indian Wells. Who knows? So have a great week, everybody. We will catch you next time on Parenting Aces.